Salutations everyone, this is Razor bringing you guys another Smash video where today we're going to be talking about two Smash players in particular, but also, a little bit of a trend, but these two unique cases. The best Melee and Smash 4 players in the world, easily, bar none. Hungrybox and Zero. Hungrybox finally got the #1 ranking, has been winning pretty much every single tournament over the past few months, including the end of last year. And you have Zero, who, yes, is retired for now, but is still ranked #1. And I'm sure if he were to enter a tournament tomorrow, he would be a favorite to win the whole thing, as he had been throughout the entirety of his Smash 4 career, which of course started out with a historic win streak that nobody thinks any other player will break in any esport. But one of the interesting things about these two top players of their field is that they are easily the most hated players out of all of the top players in their respective games. Hungrybox has way more hate than any other player in the Melee scene. Is it because he has the worst personality? No. Does he throw temper tantrums? No. Does he always gloat? No, not really. Is he disrespectful to people? No. He just wins a lot. And this isn't always the case. Armada was the previous #1. Didn't get nearly as much hate, one of the more quieter players out there, but people, when he would face Hungrybox, who was the #2 at the time, majority of people would vote for Armada to win the game. Obviously, they would root for Mewtwo King, they would root for Mango, S2J, Plup, Axe, whoever it might be. Everybody loves to root against Hungrybox, who is easily the best in Melee right now. Zero has been #1 in Smash 4 since before the game even came out. And he gets way more hate than anybody else. Once again, is this because of his personality? No. Does he treat other people around him poorly? He's actually the most beloved person within the Smash 4 community. You take a look at other players like, he has a rivalry with Nairo or with Ally. They're all really good friends. Zero's really good friends with Ally, really good friends with Nairo, doubles up with Nairo in the majority of tournaments where there was doubles available. And if you paid attention to any of the casters or any of the moderators or tournament organizers, they were all good friends with Zero. You take, D1, EE, Breezy, everybody loves Zero. It's like, oh yeah, Zero's my boy. Who's the best? Zero's the best. Like, he was like easily the most favorited player within his own community, but the audience would always root against him. They always hated Zero because he kept winning. Now, there are a lot of factors that go into this sort of mentality, and I understand a lot of it is quite obvious. People love the underdog story. We always root for the underdog. People like to see upsets, and people don't like to see the same outcome time and time and again. I'm with you on the fact that I also hate that the Patriots go to the Super Bowl every single year. It's very boring and predictable, and doesn't really make for the best storylines. But, I'll watch the Super Bowl anyway, and sometimes they don't always win. And you know what? Hungrybox and Zero don't always win either. It's not even 90% of the time. So why do we root for underdogs in the first place? You take a look at, there's been a lot of studies on the subject. Researchers back in 2007 did a study where 71 participants imagined two teams, one ranked higher than the other, that were going to compete in an Olympic swimming event. In all pairings, the participants said they would prefer to see the lower ranked team prevail over the higher ranked one, even if that higher ranked team had been the underdog in a previous scenario. We see this, you take a look at this last March Madness, where you had Chicago La Jolla just blowing through the bracket even though they were a double-digit seed. And Michigan was quite a bit of an underdog, even though that they were a single-digit seed. They were a 3 seed, I believe. And they were the underdogs going into their tournament as well, even though that they were a 3 seed. So people would kind of root for the underdog, but once the bigger underdog, the more underdog went up against them, people are rooting for La Jolla Chicago. And that, you know, really makes sense. Merely framing a team as an underdog makes people more likely to root for them. And this isn't just confined to sports or esports. In another study done in against politicians running against one another, people would be warmer and more friendlier if a candidate was portrayed as an underdog. The underdog candidate was being viewed as warmer and slightly more competent than the person who was portrayed as a front runner. They also found that we love to see when the person we like are described as underdogs. We're not so keen when we see our opponents that way. And another study showed that we perceive underdogs as being more attractive. So it's not a secret that people love underdogs, but why do we prefer the person or team that is statistically more likely to lose to prefer for them to win? Well, in one classic study, people were showed a game where the team that they were rooting for won. And it's called the basked in reflected glory effect, which means that when our favorite team wins, we feel like a winner too. This is why people root for anything, really, whether it's, you know, this team, the school that they went to, or the city that they grew up in, the team representing them, the player from their area, the player that they personally knew or had a personal interaction with. You become a fan of them and you feel good when they win. But why do we find ourselves drawn to teams or people that seem so drawn to losing? And it seems that a win means more if you're not supposed to win. And you can kind of see the payoff emotionally on how this would affect you. If your team is supposed to win, if you do win, it doesn't feel as big as if you were supposed to lose. And also, on the other hand, if you're supposed to win and you lose, it hurts more than if you were supposed to lose in the first place. So if it's 10 times more gratifying for the underdog to win, then you can understand from an emotional standpoint why you would root for the long shot, because you can get more gratifying satisfaction out of that than if the winning team won. And also, if it doesn't pan out, you don't feel as bad. It's why people run roulette and they're like, all right, it's been red these past 7 times. You know, it's due to land on black. Statistically, that's not true, but emotionally, people feel that it's true, that they're due, because in a lot of studies, we've seen that the more someone is suggested to lose, the more likely we want them to win. And this isn't really all that surprising that we want to see an underdog to win, but we also see psychologically in many different experiments that the team that is an underdog are viewed as more deserving to win and work harder than the person who is expected to win. And this obviously isn't true. No one is born being good at melee or basketball or you know, writing speeches. Those are things that you have to hone and craft and practice for a long time. You know, Hungrybox and Zero didn't just come out the pussy John Mozart. They had to work on their craft, and they work harder than the majority of other players, and that shows in their ability to overcome, be consistent, and win as well. So this isn't true. Psychologically, we want the team that's less likely to win because it becomes more gratifying for us, because we've been so much ingrained in the heartwarming, successful Cinderella stories. Psychologically, we actually come to think of underdogs as winners in disguise, because as one study suggests, we might be attracted to the little guy because we actually think the little guy is going to win, which we're convinced of precisely because the odds are against them. Like I said with the roulette analogy, you know, it's always landing on red. Therefore, black is definitely hitting on this next one. That's what so many people are keen to thinking. Because the jackpot in the lottery is bigger, you think you're more likely to win the lottery, even though, you know, it's the same odds as if it was just 3 million as opposed to 300 million. But you think because it's so much less likely for it to happen, you think it's more likely to happen. Go figure. Humans are kind of weird that way. But when it comes to Zero and Hungrybox, people at the top of their fields who practice almost as hard, if not harder than anybody else, people still root against him. There was a huge article written about Zero and all of the negativity that was being thrown his way. People, you know, they hate Diddy or they hate Zero, and they're going after, you know, his personal life, you know, attacking him on all different fronts, and how, you know, this can take a strain on a person and how it's completely undeserved. Zero, you know, didn't do things that other smashers have done. He doesn't act like a poor sport when he loses. Yet when he goes up against somebody with a negative attitude or somebody who flips chairs and stuff, people will root for the chair flipper. Not just because they love a spectacle, but because that person is the underdog and they're expected to lose. So you can kind of understand why, you know, even Mango, the most beloved smasher of all time, from the community standpoint, people always want to see him win, regardless of if he's ranked #1 or not. It wasn't always that way. Remember, Mango wasn't always the most beloved person, especially back in the day when he was rocking that ground Jigglypuff. But, you know, people love Spaceys, they love Mango, they love how cocky he is and his personality, and, you know, all of the memes going around. But if he's down, you know, 2-1 to S2J, you know, a homie of his, but someone who is less likely to win, people start rooting for S2J. Even though, if it's you know, if it's a tournament setting, if Mango's knocked out, viewership goes down because he's the most popular player. But even if there is an upset in the making, people will start to root for that underdog, even if the most beloved player is the one who would be defeated. So people will root for Plup over Hungrybox. People will root for Mewtwo King because it's a comeback story. People root for Armada because he's no longer #1, or because they hate Hungrybox. People want PPMD to come back because he hasn't played in forever, so they build up in their minds that he's still so amazing. You know, even if you weren't a fan of him back in the day because he was so good or so dominant, so many people want him back now, the more so before, because he hasn't played in so long. So that's kind of an underdog story in and that of itself. Even if he was to come back and just be completely dominant, people would cheer for that because it has a little bit of the underdog mentality to it. But, you know, Leffen isn't the most hated person, even though he has the most toxic attitude. He's very, very childish and, you know, throws a lot of shade and hate towards people as we see in a lot of other fighting games where you see, like, say, in Street Fighter or Tekken, where people are always tossing chairs and throwing little temper tantrums. You don't see that as much in Smash. You do see it sometimes, usually only in pools, especially if it's like somebody that they always lose to time and time again, or if they almost get an upset, or if they get reverse 3-0'd or something like that. But Leffen isn't the most, you know, hated player. Some people like there to be a villain story, and you can kind of understand that, and that's been downplayed a little bit, you know, over the past year or so, but it's starting to come back. You know, he's not, you know, shaking hands and being a bit of a dick, but people will still always root for him over Hungrybox the majority of the time. Why is Hungrybox, out of all the top 10 players, why is he the most hated? Is it because he's the best? No, because when he was ranked #2 or #3, he was still always hated on. But if Hungrybox, you say, oh, it's because of Jigglypuff, that argument doesn't hold up. Let's say Hungrybox isn't playing Smash. People will root for Prince Abu because guess what? He's not supposed to win. He's not supposed to beat Mango. He's not supposed to beat Plup. He's not supposed to beat SFAT. So, but maybe people hate Jigglypuff because of Hungrybox. That kind of makes sense. He's the only top player playing Jigglypuff right now, and it's a really tough position to be a Jigglypuff player when the most common character has the best matchup in the game against that character and may have the biggest advantages out of any matchup, at least of tournament viable characters, and maybe the whole roster overall. So it should be so impressive to people, as it is to me, that a Jigglypuff player beats the other 36 Foxes in the tournament when Fox has such an advantage in the matchup with the up throw up airs and the up smashes and just having so many tools specifically almost tailored to defeat Jigglypuff, how he can consistently time and time again beat SFAT, beat Mango, beat Leffen, beat Mewtwo King, beat Plup Fox, beat everybody. Everybody has a Fox. Every single top player in the game has a Fox. But this little Jigglypuff player keeps beating them time and time again, even though it's kind of an underdog story every single time because Jigglypuff isn't supposed to beat Fox. And he's the only one that does it. That's the thing. He's the only one that does it. So, you don't have to love Zero. You don't have to love Hungrybox. They don't have to be your favorite. But it's kind of weird how they're the most hated and they're also the best at the game. Zero wasn't winning every single tournament. He had that streak where he did, and it was kind of exciting to see a streak continue, the little Joe DiMaggio thing going on. But, once that ended, more people started hating on Zero. Like, oh, Zero's in grand finals, snore. They didn't appreciate what this guy was doing time and time again and how consistently good he was. We all do like an underdog story, and I'm not always, rooting for the top build player in a matchup. It's, exciting when somebody knocks a god out in pools to loser's bracket or something like that. But especially when it's, like in Smash 4 where it's not always a shoe-in, Hungrybox is always going to make it out of pools. Zero hasn't always made it out of pools. Ally hasn't always made it out of pools. Nairo, Leia haven't always made it out of pools. People rooted for Salem, back in, Evo of 2017. He had never won a tournament. Abeo had never won a tournament, and he beats Zero. After that, nobody was rooting for Salem because he'd won. He became a winner. He's won 2 tournaments in a row. It was crazy. Bayonetta hadn't changed. She hadn't been, nerfed or buffed or anything within that time frame. Yet people started hating on Salem, hating on Bayonetta so much in extension, hating on Bayonetta players, which doesn't make sense. So what he used to be an underdog, but everything changed. He didn't change, the character didn't change, the people changed. Their perception of the game changed. And it's not super cut and dry. People hate that, rest can kill you at, 30%, off of an up throw tech chase situation. People hate that Bayonetta can do crazy stuff. You can understand that. But to always hate on Zero, or to always hate on Salem, or to always hate on Hungrybox, or, whoever the best Smash player may be, let's say Plup goes on a tear and he just dominates, then people are going to always root against him. Obviously the top players are always going to have their subset of fans, but it's very, very different, especially when it comes to these 2 Smash players in particular, because Patriots have a ton of fans, the Yankees have a ton of fans, the Cavaliers have a ton of fans, Celtics have a ton of fans, AC Milan, they have a ton of fans, in pretty much every situation. A very, very good team or good individual player are always going to be beloved, Federer has a ton of fans. If he wins, then people are screaming yay. But in Smash, particularly with these 2 characters, which I know it's a little bit more complicated because of the way that things are with, characters and the meta and things like that, people hate on them. More so than anybody else. No one is more hated in Smash 4 than Zero. no one is hated more in Melee than Hungrybox. And they're also #1 in their field. Zero doesn't win, hasn't won every single tournament. He's won, if you take a look at his past 10 tournaments, he hasn't won all of them, or, close to all of them. It's not like he just lost 1 or 2 or 3. And Hungrybox just within the last year became #1. But still, if Zero's in a tournament tomorrow, people are going to hate on him. Hungrybox, next tournament that he's in, people are going to hate on him. So the underdog story is understandable, and everyone's going to root for an underdog at some point in time. But the fact that these two are the most hated on when there's no real reason to hate on them, people say I'm tired of the same person winning all the time, but Hungrybox and Zero don't win 100% or even 90% of all the tournaments that they go into. So that kind of argument falls a little bit flat. And, if someone was an underdog, but then they're going up against someone who's even lower than them, people will turn against them. So it's a mob mentality thing, and it's just a lot of undeserved vitriol against these players simply just because they're really good. No one's hating on MVD because he's playing Diddy Kong, but people hate on Zero because he's playing it. No one's hating on Prince Abu because he's playing Jigglypuff, but people hate on Hungrybox. So you can't say it's the character. People hating on Salem, but guess what? He's the only Bayonetta player that's winning tournaments right now. He's the only one who's doing it. So you can't say that it's because the character. It's because I guess some people just don't like winners that win, because it hurts the underdog complex, or maybe it hurts their one player that they tend to like. So it's a very interesting thing with Smash specifically, and honestly doesn't make any sense to root so much vehemently against people just because they're good, and these two in particular. So those are just my 2 cents. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, because it's not as cut and dry as some people might in the Twitch or YouTube comments play it out to be.